Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches. And today I'm going to be talking about America 3000 from 1986. And this film posits that sometime around the end of the 20th century, nuclear apocalypse devastates the globe. And we immediately cut to 1,000 years later, when the only remnants of civilization are the Frel. The Frel have a more or less Iron Age society, I guess. They live in small settlements with wooden walls, like a wooden palisade around it. They use crossbows, knives, whips, those sort of technology level of weaponry, and they rely on horses for transporting themselves in wooden carts and riding on, and for use it as to transport goods. They also keep slaves, plutogs, brutish barbarians, whom they capture from the wasteland and then assign into one of three roles. A macho or worker, a toy, which means taking certain steps to ensure that the plutog remains docile, or a cedar, whom the Frels need in order to replenish their numbers, because Frels and plutogs, you see, are the same species. We would know them as women and men, respectively. The premise of the film appears to be that women, being more prone to cooperation and less prone to competition, have retained some level of organisation and technology, giving them the upper hand in this literal battle of the sexes. The status quo of the situation is about to change, however, when a young and unusually clever plutog named Corvus stumbles across a book that teaches him his ABCs, and which he is then able to use to learn other things. He begins to recruit other plutogs and teach them what he has learned. Of course, there's a sizable faction of the Frel who are far from pleased with these developments, and the question is, can Corvus find an ally to bring about a détente, or will the Frels and plutogs destroy each other like the Americans and Ruskies before them? This is the greatest post-apocalyptic science fiction film ever to be written by a man who also wrote a Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling movie, which, is pretty faint praise, but I do honestly like this film, probably more than it deserves. Let's talk about why. So first of all, I love that this film is so very, very, very 80s. There's massive hair. Apparently perms are one technology that survived the apocalypse. There's hair metal rock. There's references to commies and Ronald Reagan. And there's a wide variety of invented slang words thrown into the script, as well as random oddities like a 7-foot tall ape man with a boombox, because, why not? Oh, and of course there's the so-called war between the sexes, which is front and centre. That was a thing that, people talked about in the 80s, the war of the sexes. Only a film from the 80s, I think, could be quite so unself-conscious in its bombastic silliness, and be this absurd while also being played completely straight. Even as the Frels address their leader as Tiara, because a princess wears a tiara, the cast and the script portray all of this incredibly goofy nonsense without a hint of a smirk. Like, it's all very silly and over the top and pastiche. The film is aware of that. Like, the film knows it's silly, but it's also smart enough to recognise that the characters shouldn't recognise the situation as silly and act like it's serious. And that's part of what makes it so entertaining and so fun. Second thing I like is that despite being a post-apocalyptic movie with the collapse of society and slavery and all that entails, and despite occasionally featuring some not very nice people doing some not very nice things, at its heart, America 3000 is light-hearted and optimistic. Its interpretation of the alleged war between the sexes is sufficiently silly and over the top as to not fall into being grumpy chauvinism. Spoiler for the men in the audience, women saying that they have a right to be treated equally is not and has never been a war on anything. It's just a request for basic decency. And the film even avoids the usual low-budget shtick of throwing in some boobs to lure in teen boys. There's no nudity. There's not even really any significant sexuality. Most important in all of its protagonists are ultimately people who strive to make the world better for everyone, not just for themselves. It's a movie that champions cooperation and treating others with respect rather than competition and grabbing everything for yourself. So at the same time that it is being so very, very 80s, like I said, it's also thoroughly anti-80s in its rejection of the me culture depicted in films like The Wolf of Wall Street. And that's something that I really like about it. And finally, on a more technical level, a common weakness of low budget films in general, and low budget science fiction films in particular, is weak undercooked action sequences. Two of the most common problems that these films will have is poorly staged fights and embarrassingly empty battles where alleged armies are depicted by like half a dozen people on each side. America 3000's action scenes are a genuinely refreshing surprise. They're pretty well executed, and the one large Frel versus Plutog battle involves a goodly number of combatants on each side, with people charging around on horses, explosions, and plenty of solid character moments worked into the action. It's really, all things considered, an astonishingly ambitious and effectively done sequence, given the kind of budget that they've had for a film like this. I can't imagine that this movie was, exactly super duper expensive to make. At the end of the day, America 3000 might not technically be a, quote, good film, unquote, but it's surprisingly good for what it is, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. And you know what? If I can sit there for 90 minutes and have a good time, I think the movie's been pretty successful, and that is exactly the experience that I've had every time I've watched America 3000. And I mean, in the 30 years, more than 30 years since I first saw it, I have seen it a good half dozen times. It's just fun. Next time, the sequel to Pitch Black. Though it has to be said, the two films are nothing alike. 2004's The Chronicles of Riddick. But that's next time. In the meantime, thanks for watching this one, and I hope you enjoyed it.